One of the lines that has become clear to me in Kendrick Lamar's performance last night is 40 acres and a mule. And that line is particularly potent for many Black Americans. And it happens to be a line that I remember from my education growing up in grade school in the Bronx. And I vaguely remember what it was about. It was something that was promised enslaved people. I can't remember whether I was told it was before or after emancipation, but it had to do with the Civil War. And I've since had my memory refreshed. And it was something that the federal government promised enslaved people that they would get, and it would help them get a head start. But as with many promises given to Native Americans, they didn't come through. And I never really equated 40 acres and a mule because it was not something that really ever touched my life. But in thinking about it this morning, I never really equated it with something else that was very important to American life, which was the Homestead Act. Now, if you don't recall the Homestead Act, for some reason, there's a lot of American history that really stayed with me.
Land is power, land is wealth, but for centuries, Black Americans have had their land stolen through violence, legal loopholes, and government-backed discrimination. How did this happen? And what are the lasting effects today? Watch and pay attention, and I will share my thought later.
One of the lines that has become clear to me in Kendrick Lamar's performance last night is 40 acres and a mule. And that line is particularly potent for many Black Americans. And it happens to be a line that I remember from my education growing up in grade school in the Bronx. And I vaguely remember what it was about. It was something that was promised enslaved people. I can't remember whether I was told it was before or after emancipation, but it had to do with the Civil War. And I've since had my memory refreshed. And it was something that the federal government promised enslaved people that they would get, and it would help them get a head start. But as with many promises given to Native Americans, they didn't come through. And I never really equated 40 acres and a mule because it was not something that really ever touched my life. But in thinking about it this morning, I never really equated it with something else that was very important to American life, which was the Homestead Act. Now, if you don't recall the Homestead Act, for some reason, there's a lot of American history that really stayed with me. And the Homestead Act was an act that the federal government felt was extremely important because they wanted to populate the Midwestern part of our country, the prairie. And so they offered 160 acres free and clear to people who would farm the land, ranch the land. I guess it was really only good for farming, but they would give free and clear 160 acres to people, and they had mapped out a huge swath of prairie land. And it was white people who took that land, and that's how a lot of our Midwest cities came into being. And they didn't rescind that promise. They gave 160 acres to people free and clear, and all they had to do was stake it out. And this may be apocryphal, but I seem to remember in class hearing how there was a date and they and people lining up and they set off a bell and you could just go and stake out your plot of land, and it was yours, and you could farm it. And that was the beginning of generational wealth for a lot of white people. A lot of these people came from Germany and Middle European countries, and they got a stake in this country. And here we have enslaved people who were brought over against their will and finally released from bondage and promised for their servitude they would be given 40 acres and a mule, and a mule. And they got nothing. And they had to start from scratch. Just a thought. Think about that. Think about how you'd feel if that promise was made to you and then you were just blown off. Okay, that's it.
Do you want to know my feelings about the fact that Kendrick Lamar only had black people during his halftime show at the Super Bowl? I think it's fucking perfect. Go on. That fucking show was just spot on, start to finish. Gave me chills, and I'm so glad. I'm so glad that he didn't put any white people in it, because guess what? Get rid of the DEI, and black people don't need to represent white people anymore. What a terrible shame.
I now understand that halftime show. Let me explain it to you real quick. Come on. All right, so it went for you. That's why they told you to turn that TV off, and you listened. That's why. All right, but let me explain it. It was a political statement. It was a political statement with a diss at the end. And if you didn't know Kendrick Lamar's music or his background or anything, it still wasn't for you. It wasn't for you. This is all from the comments section of my last post. This wasn't for you. It wasn't for me. It wasn't for you. It ain't for you, baby. That's okay. I had another guy just tell me I wasn't black enough. Now, that really hurt. But I don't know what can get more political than the first sitting living president coming to the Super Bowl. I feel like that's a big statement, right? Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. You know, I'm just very aware that I'm not woke enough. And evidently, what does this dumb redneck know? I'm just dumb redneck. But yeah, no, this wasn't for you. So just, you know, get up in the fetal position and just cry and cry, because this just wasn't for you, baby.
People keep saying this 40 acres and a mule thing was about broken promises to black people. And yeah, but can we finally just also call it what it was? It was theft. I am loving all of the analysis of Kendrick Lamar's brilliant Super Bowl performance, and I cannot claim to know nearly enough to explain all of the nuance there. But the one thing I have kind of been picking up on is that we keep when he says 40 acres and a mule, this is bigger than the music. I keep hearing people talking about this historically like this was some altruistic thing after the Civil War that the government just didn't follow through on. And we talk about black people this way all the time. Like, oh my God, we've got to, have welfare. We've got to have these handouts for equity and fairness and to make up for historical disadvantages and all of that. But the reason black Americans have historically been poor and been disenfranchised is because we keep stealing their stuff. We started with stealing their labor. That built so much of the wealth in this country. And then after, there's like this tiny little pittance of, hey, maybe you should get some back pay from the estates of the people that were stealing from you, among other things. And then we kind of went, nah. So especially when we have Kendrick Lamar calling out things like he owns his music because he made it by himself, that's his. I think we can stand to kind of look a little bit more and go, hey, America's also theirs. It is the black story. It is black people building and working and white people trying to take it and successfully taking it a lot of the time. especially with all this talk about DEI and, oh, it's undeserved, it's a handout, you're not choosing the best people. That's just such bullshit. Nothing we have talked about doing in the name of equity is some unfair gift because we feel bad. It's just paying back what's stolen.
You know, there was something in 1865, particularly after there had been struggles. I think one of the Americans, very senior officials, I forget his name, said that when you free people, give them 40 acres and a mule so that they start from somewhere. It was thought that at that time, really, you must start. I've been working for you for all this while. You've freed me. I have a family. How am I going to survive? So give me something to start. And this is exactly what was said. Give them 40 acres and a mule. And of course, nobody got 40 acres and a mule, so that they found themselves in the wilderness, groping in the dark. You used to work. You used to wake up and work. And when you worked, you ate, and you had somewhere to sleep. Now you are free. But what kind of freedom is this? There is no work. There is nothing to eat. You are starting literally from zero.
Hey, white rap fan here. I loved the halftime show. And not just because Kendrick is one of my favorite rappers. No. Because of his specific reference to his own song, Wesley's Theory, when he was saying 40 acres and a mule. I believe he was referring to Wesley's Theory specifically because it's the first track on his To Pimp a Butterfly album, which, according to Genius, is about how racist American institutions uphold white supremacy by exploiting black creators for profit. Now, let's just take a look at the Super Bowl in general first. I'm not saying nothing. Now, I want to go ahead and talk about some specific lyrics from Wesley's Theory in the first verse with Kendrick. When I get signed, homie, I'ma buy a strap, straight from the CIA, set it on my lap, take a few M16s to the hood, pass them all out on the block, what's good? Now, this is obviously referencing the CIA infiltrating black neighborhoods through, the crack epidemic, and then also MKUltra, which I'll be making a video about in a little bit. Now, the next verse I'm going to talk about is what I was specifically thinking of when he said 40 acres and a mule. What you want? You a house or a car, 40 acres and a mule, a piano, a guitar, anything. Say my name is Uncle Sam, I'm your dog. Motherfucker, you can live at the mall. Now, I'm just ripping this straight off of the American College of Trust and Estate Council's website, but 40 acres and a mule refers to the unfulfilled promise made to formerly enslaved African Americans after the Civil War, which was intended to provide them with land and resources for economic self-sufficiency. The phrase symbolizes the ongoing struggle for reparations and economic justice for descendants of slaves in the United States. I believe in this specific verse, the Uncle Sam character is saying 40 acres and a mule mockingly because he's like a house or a car, 40 acres and a mule, a piano, a guitar, because consumerism has taken over that original American dream of owning land. That's kind of why we conquered the entire continent in the first place, because everybody wanted to own land. And I believe Kendrick is specifically critiquing American consumerism and the way it's affected the black community. I don't want to speak too much on it because I'm not black, but how there's not been as much of an opportunity to build up generational wealth, and the government's hand in pushing consumerism and buying nice things as success in America and a way to rise up in the class structure. I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up the video now. If you enjoyed this, follow me for more history content. I'm doing a Black History lesson every day this month. I will see y'all next video.
You know, there are a lot of political meanings in Kendrick's Super Bowl show that I noticed, so I'm going to urge you to go back and watch his performance while thinking about American history and politics. Consider actor Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam. Who or what does this version of Uncle Sam remind you of? And has Samuel L. Jackson ever played a role like this before? Or is he representing, as some have suggested, how black artists get policed in mainstream spaces? And then you can consider the stage. If you think of the mass incarceration of black Americans, what does the movement on the dancers on the stage represent to you? And then consider the color scheme of red, white, and blue. Does it cause you to consider who can be patriotic or who the American flag belongs to? And when that flag split in half, what do you think Kendrick Lamar was saying? Consider the American workforce, too, from the 1600s through the 1800s. Who built America? And what did it mean when those dancers bent over while we heard 40 acres and a mule, which is one of the many broken promises at the end of slavery? Now, you may say, I don't want politics at my Super Sunday halftime show. And I would ask, then why do we sing the national anthem? Why do we have a military flyover? Why do we have the presentation of arms? Because it's America, and we love to have our sports and our history and our art. And what Kendrick Lamar did was just deliver a very patriotic, historical, and entertaining Super Bowl show.
There's been a lot of talk about 40 Acres and a Mule since Kendrick's Super Bowl performance. So I wanted to give you the full explanation of what 40 Acres and a Mule actually is. The promise of 40 Acres and a Mule is tied to the period of Reconstruction in the United States following the Civil War. The American Civil War ended in April of 1865, and the southern states seceded and were integrated into the Union. One of the most pressing issues was how to address the freed slaves. The United States government established the Freedmen's Bureau, which aimed to assist formerly enslaved people and poor white people in the South by providing food, housing, medical care, education, and employment. In January of 1865, in response to the devastation caused by the war, General Sherman issued Special Field Orders number 15. This directive set aside land along the coast of South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida for the settlement of freed slaves. It granted 40 acres of land to each family of freedmen, and in some cases, the military mules were also provided for farming. This is where the 40 acres and a mule promise originates. In April of 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and Vice President Andrew Johnson became president. Johnson's views on Reconstruction were much more lenient toward the South, and he was less supportive of policies that would benefit former slaves. After Lincoln's assassination, President Andrew Johnson issued a proclamation that reversed Sherman's order. He ordered that the land given to freed slaves be returned to former Confederate landowners. This was part of his broader policy of rapid reintegration of the southern states without significant protections for the newly freed black population. Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which aimed to protect the civil rights of former slaves and grant them citizenship. However, the law didn't address the land ownership or economic independence for freed people. During this time was also the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. In the mid-1860s, the Ku Klux Klan and other white supremacist groups began to form in the South. They sought to intimidate and terrorize freed black people, making it even harder for them to claim land or fully participate in American society. When they did away with Sherman's order, most of the freed slaves were never able to acquire land. The idea of 40 acres and a mule was not widely realized, and many former slaves remained economically dependent. Congress passed the Reconstruction Acts, which divided the South into military districts and required Southern states to create new constitutions that guaranteed black men the right to vote. However, these efforts still did not address land distribution on a large scale to keep the wage gap where it was. In 1877, when President Rutherford B. Hayes agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South in exchange for Southern Democrats accepting his election, this led to the rise of Jim Crow laws and the disenfranchisement of black people, making it even more difficult for them to gain economic independence and land ownership. The promise of 40 acres and a mule remained unfulfilled, and many black families were left landless. Land equaled money. Land is what created this significant wage gap that still exists today. Black people built this country. Their free labor built this country. Our free labor made the United States a superpower. This is a fact, not an opinion. And we have never been paid for making this country a superpower. Get that through your head. That is what this is about. That is how ghettos were created. That is how our schools are still underfunded. That is how I can have the same job as a white person and still get paid less than them because of the promise of 40 acres and a mule never being fulfilled. And that is why black people deserve reparations, because none of you would be here without us. The lack of land redistribution remains a significant chapter in the history of racial inequality in the United States. 40 acres and a mule was an initial promise made during Reconstruction that ultimately was not honored. And the failure to provide land to freed slaves is a significant part of the larger story of systemic racism and economic disenfranchisement in the U.S. to this day. So, as the world begins to watch Black people get their 40 acres and a mule by any means necessary, understand it is owed. This video was brought to you by the Black Revolutionary Collective, an organization focused on building economic power and political power for all Black people everywhere. I love you, Black man. I love you, Black woman. Knowledge is power. Power to the people.
No one noticed that a mistake Kendrick Lamar made during the Super Bowl made Trump extremely angry. When the 59th Super Bowl finals were held, Trump was watching the game on site, and a performance of Kendrick Lamar during the halftime show made Trump extremely uncomfortable and even very angry. During the performance, Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam labeled the black dancers in red, white, and blue costumes as too noisy, too presumptuous, and too ghetto, and reminded them to follow the rules, conveying the contradictions and problems of race and class in American society. During Trump's tenure, he was dissatisfied with players kneeling during the playing of the national anthem to protest against racial discrimination. Therefore, Lamar's expression on this related theme made Trump feel being insinuated and in an awkward position. In addition, Lamar has a large number of fans among young people and music lovers. When he shows strong artistic appeal and concern for social issues in his performance, it will arouse a strong response from the audience. This forms a contrast with Trump's image and influence in the political field. Trump feels that he is out of place in such a cultural and artistic atmosphere and is unable to dominate and control the situation as he does in political situations. What do you think of Lamar's performance?
So what happened? 40 acres and a mule, the reparations deal with the American government was broken. What happened next? Well, we enter into a period called Reconstruction. We're going to talk about it. Come, let's do our homework. So we've been talking about 40 acres and a mule, the deal that the federal government had with newly freed Black people who had been enslaved during the Civil War and found themselves released into a whole new world. Now they were free in the United States, but with no infrastructure, no education, scattered to the winds. Their families had been sold off and lost. They needed some help getting their feet under them so that they could become thriving members of society. And for a moment, we were on the right track as a nation. Abraham Lincoln had a plan for Reconstruction for the South. He wanted to reincorporate the seceded states and offer citizenship to the newly freed Black people. However, things went off the rails when Lincoln was assassinated and his vice president, Andrew Johnson, took over. And yes, it's Andrew Johnson. Some of you thought you were going to correct me and tell me that it was Andrew Jackson. It's a different asshole, different old white dude, same asshole tendencies. Andrew Jackson is the guy that's on the $20 bill. He is also a piece of shit, but he was long dead before Andrew Johnson took over and ran our country into a ditch right after the Civil War. So how did things go so horribly wrong? Well, the most important thing to remember is how quickly this all went down, right? So last time we talked about William Sherman writing his field order number 15. And that was where we get this phrase, 40 acres and a mule. So he writes this order in January of 1865. And it is quickly adopted by President Lincoln. And almost immediately, Congress establishes the Freedmen's Bureau. Now, this is a governmental agency at the federal level that was designed to help the newly freed Black people establish their new lives, right? Become citizens, find their families, get married, all that stuff. Then a month later, the Civil War officially ends. Robert E. Lee surrenders to Ulysses S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse. That's the part of history that everybody, white people, are taught, right? The end of the Civil War here. And then we're just supposed to think everything went back to normal and got hunky-dory. But that's not the experience of the newly freed Black people, especially in the South. Because just 5 days after the Civil War officially ends, Lincoln is assassinated by a Confederate sympathizer named John Wilkes Booth. But that's not all that went down on April 14th, 1865. The plan was much bigger. Yeah, John Wilkes Booth was on the side of the South. He was pissed about Lincoln's plans to reincorporate Black people into society. There was major systemic racism behind most of the stuff that went down subsequently. Was Lincoln assassinated successfully? Yes. But what we aren't often reminded of is that there was also a plot to assassinate Andrew Johnson, except his would-be assassin decided not to go through with it. Is that because Johnson was a Confederate sympathizer? Probably. And the third part of the plan was to assassinate William Seward, who was Lincoln's Secretary of State. Now, Seward was also much along the Lincoln plan of Reconstruction, getting the South back together to rejoin the Union, but also bring along racial equality to the new United States of America. And this was a seriously dirty deed. The guy that was supposed to assassinate William Seward, it all happened on the same night. And Seward is attacked in his home. The guy bum rushes his house, jumps into his bed, stabs him in the face and the neck. Then, of course, there's a nationwide hunt for the bad guys. So you can just imagine the chaos that's happening in the country right now. A couple of weeks later, General Oliver Howard becomes the commissioner of the Freedmen's Bureau. Howard? That name familiar? Yeah, he's the guy that helped found Howard University. I mean, and this has all happened in only a few months, right? Sherman wrote his articles in January of 1865. It's now May of 1865. The war has ended. The president's been assassinated and chaos reigns. This is all happening very, very quickly. Now, in May of 1865, our new president, Andrew Johnson, decides to totally scrap Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. And talk about a little bitch. He is a little bitch about it because he's butthurt that the South was going to suffer so much. He was from Tennessee. He was a Confederate sympathizer too. And he didn't think that the South should have to suffer for their crimes. So the first thing he does is revokes Sherman's order. So guess what? No 40 acres and a mule for any of the freed black people. Absolutely not. He says, okay, yeah, fine. We'll stick with the 13th Amendment. We'll abolish slavery, but let them figure it out for themselves. Let the states figure it out for themselves. That's his whole mantra, that the federal government is not going to help anybody. Fuck them. His other thing that he does is he pardons all the Confederate criminals from the war. Sound familiar yet? The other thing he does here is he returns all the seized land back to the white people who had been operating it before the war. So if you were a plantation owner in the South and you seceded from the Union, instead of being charged with treason and sent to prison, and that land is now unoccupied, and so he was going to give it to the freed slaves and they were going to farm it, he pardons everybody. Nobody's going to jail. In fact, here's your land back, guys. Here you go. I know you had a plantation here before. Now you can just take over, carry on as you were. No worries. Everybody's pardoned. Nobody's in trouble. And he decides he does not think that blacks should be granted citizenship. So they're in this weird limbo area of not being slaves anymore, but they're not full citizens, so they have no judicial rights. They can't own land or property. They're like stuck in this weird place. So what happens? You become a sharecropper, an indentured servant. People were desperate to make a living, and without land ownership or actual citizenship rights, they just became one step beyond where they had been before.
Kendrick told us what his performance was going to be way before he even performed. I just watched his halftime performance back for like the 10th time, and it just clicked that he already told us what he was doing before he did it. First of all, the symbolism with everything, like this man is actually a genius, and the storytelling with this halftime show was unmatched. In his interview with Apple Music before the halftime show, he told us what he was trying to do with the halftime show.
When people talk about rap, man, the conversations I hear, they think it's just rap and it's not an actual art form. So when you put records like that at the forefront, it reminds people that this 50 years ago, they forget that it's even been here 50 years, right? And like kind of like belittle it. So I love to see that it gets that type of recognition for just straight raps, from awards to the billboards, all that, because this is truly just as big as an art form and a genre as any other genre. So
Kendrick was really trying to show that rap is an art. This was not supposed to be a time where he's showing a greatest hits and everybody just get up and dance. He's trying to tell a story similar to what artists do when they're painting. Not everything is supposed to be super consumable or entertaining, but it's supposed to relay a message, and especially with the usage of Samuel L. Jackson as Uncle Sam. If you guys notice, every time Kendrick started rapping or they started doing rap songs, he was not having it. Uncle Sam kept telling them, you need to switch it up, do something different, because it's not consumable for him. The one time that Uncle Sam was happy with Kendrick's performance was when they slowed it down, when SZA came out and they started to do slower songs and singing. At that point, Uncle Sam was like, you finally get it. We don't want all that ghetto hood stuff. Give us, like, just sing and look happy. And I feel like this was also confirmed in society with the way people were reacting to this performance. I saw so many people saying, can he stop rapping? Can he stop? Like, this is too much. And it's kind of proving his point of people not thinking rap is a serious genre to be viewed as art and not being taken as serious as other genres. I literally saw someone say they should have had a country artist. And I feel like this goes into the Drake beef because he doesn't feel like Drake takes the same care of rap and hip hop as he wants it to be. But let me know what else you guys noticed.
Kendrick Lamar didn't just perform at the Super Bowl. He made a statement. His halftime show wasn't just about entertainment. It was about symbolism, storytelling, and pushing boundaries. The entire performance unfolded across 4 stages that were shaped like a PlayStation controller button. And that wasn't just a design choice. It was Lamar's way of showing his life as a video game, a journey through obstacles, survival, and resistance. While many people appreciated the artistry, others, especially some white viewers, felt confused or even uncomfortable. Some white folks watched and thought that was cool, but others dug deeper and listened to black voices breaking down the symbolism and realized just how layered the performance was. The American flag imagery, the way the dancers moved, and the subtle nods to Lamar's ongoing themes, it was all intentional. But some white folks weren't just confused, they were angry. Some were upset that there were no white performers, no white dancers, no obvious appeal to white audiences. People who usually claim they don't see color suddenly saw it everywhere. But why did it bother them? Because this performance wasn't centered on them. It wasn't for them, by them, and about them. It didn't ask their permission, seek their approval, or cater to their comfort. And that's unsettling when you're used to being in control. Seeing Samuel L. Jackson as a black Uncle Sam, watching a show that didn't need whiteness at its center, that flipped the usual power dynamic. It puts whiteness in the position of the observed, and for some, that was too much. This is the same discomfort some people felt when a black man walked into the White House. The same outrage that erupts whenever black joy exists outside of white validation. Because black joy, self-sustained, unbothered, and fully free, has always been seen as a challenge to white supremacy. But here's the thing, art doesn't have to center us for us to appreciate it. We don't have to fully understand something for it to be valuable. Curiosity and humility go a long way. Instead of reacting with fear or frustration, we can choose to learn. So today, I'm grateful for the voices that helped me see what I missed. And I'm thankful for the artists, the activists, the storytellers who challenged me to think beyond my own lens. Because last night, Kendrick Lamar didn't just put on a halftime show, but he put up a mirror. And what we saw in it, that's up to us.
After the Civil War, formerly enslaved black Americans were promised land, 40 acres, and a mule. But after President Lincoln's assassination, his successor, Andrew Johnson, overturned the order, giving that land back to former Confederation landowners. This was the first major betrayal. Even when black people acquired land, thriving black communities like Tulsa Greenwood District, also known as Black Wall Street, were burned to the ground. The message was clear. Black prosperity would not be tolerated. Many black families lost their land due to legal loopholes, like heirs property laws, which made it easy for speculators to force sales. Government also seized black-owned land under eminent domain, claiming it was for public use, only to later sell it to private developers. The U.S. Department of Agriculture systematically denied black farmers loans and resources while favoring white farmers. This led to a massive loss of black-owned farmland. In 1920, black farmers owned 14% of all U.S. farmland. Today, it is less than 1%. Land theft is not just history, it is happening today. Gentrification is pushing black families out of historical black neighborhoods, pricing them out of their own homes. The cycle of displacement continues. Despite everything, black communities continue to fight for justice. Calls for reparation and land restorations are growing. Some organizations are helping black farmers reclaim land. The question is, will America finally do the right thing? Land theft has played a major role in black economic inequality. Understanding this history is crucial to creating change. Thank you for watching, guys, and bye for now.